Coming up on Arirang News, data show South Korea's real GDP last year contracted by 1.0%. It's fared much better than other countries in the pandemic and is expected to rise 2 places in the rankings of the world's biggest economies. South Korea is about to start another round of negotiations with the United States on the amount of money Seoul should contribute for the stationing of American troops here. Both sides have suggested that a deal is imminent. And President Moon Jae-in accepts the resignation of the Prosecutor General Yoon Seok-youl, who says he's stepping down over the government's plan to transfer the prosecution's investigative powers to a new agency. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The South Korean economy last year shrank for the first time since the Asian financial crisis in 1998. That's a smaller decline, though, than most other major economies. And there are signs of improvement thanks to solid exports. Ji-young reports.
The South Korean economy in 2020 contracted for the first time since the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis more than 2 decades ago. According to the Bank of Korea on Thursday, the country's real GDP in 2020 contracted by 1% on-year, unchanged from the January estimate. This is the lowest figure since 1998, when it posted a negative growth of 5.1%. It is also only the 3rd time in history that the country's economy contracted. It previously shrunk in 1980 during the oil shock and in 1998 amid the Asian financial crisis.
This economic crisis that we're experiencing due to the COVID-19 pandemic has caused GDP growth to fall by 1% last year, from 2% in 2019. But it is expected to turn to positive growth of 3%, so the amount of contraction is not as bad compared to previous crises.
One of the main drivers of the contraction was decreased private spending. Spending in the service sector, including restaurants and lodging, which require face-to-face interactions, has gone down by about 5% on-year. The country's per capita income also fell by 1.1% in 2020 compared to the previous year. It has now fallen for 2 consecutive years. The central bank attributed the fall to the appreciation of the greenback and contraction of the economy. There are signs of improvement, though, as the country's economy in the 4th quarter of 2020 grew by an estimated 1.2% compared to the previous quarter. The central bank said this was largely due to exports increasing by 5.4% on-quarter, led by semiconductors and chemical products. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi on Thursday posted on his social media that although the economy could not avoid negative growth, it is forecast to become the world's 10th biggest economy, moving up 2 places. He added that by bolstering the recovery of exports and investments and improving domestic consumption at the same time, the government will go all out to achieve its goal of 3.2% economic growth this year. Ji-young, Arirang News.
South Korea's consumer prices rose in February by the most in a year. This was largely due to a steep rise in the price of groceries for the Lunar New Year holiday, when supplies were hit by bad weather last year. Kim Sung-min reports.
South Korea's consumer prices in February saw the biggest jump in a year due to a sharp increase in the prices of agricultural, livestock, and fisheries products. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the consumer price index stood at 107 last month, up 1.1% on-year. The inflation was largely driven by agricultural, livestock, and fisheries product prices, which increased by 16.2%, the sharpest increase in 10 years. Of these, agricultural products rose more than 21%.
Prices of vegetables and fruits have been showing an upward trend due to a poor harvest last year following the long monsoon season and typhoons. This month in particular had additional demand during the New Year's holiday, driving the huge jump in the prices.
The pandemic has also kept the demand for home meals high last month, which led the prices for food and drink to rise by 9.7%. The price of services was also up 0.5%. On the other hand, entertainment and culture, phone bills, transport, and education all saw price drops. Industrial product prices were down 0.7% despite the rise in global oil prices. Even though consumer prices surged this month, the core inflation rate, an index that excludes food and energy prices, edged up 0.8%, staying below 1% for 3 consecutive months. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
In the pandemic, all the plastic waste from delivery food and takeout has become a serious issue. So environmentally conscious consumers in South Korea are bringing their own containers when getting food to take home with them. Baeunji reports.
This college student wanted to do something to cut down the amount of plastic that comes from food deliveries and takeouts. So for the past 7 months, she has been taking her own reusable containers to restaurants when ordering takeout food. Before deciding what size container she'll need, she looked through the reviews in a food delivery app.
아니, 저 일회용기 사용을 줄이고 있는데 혹시 포장용기에 받아갈 수 있을까요? 이렇게 제가 다 써왔거든요. 이거랑 콩나물.
If she had not brought her own containers for takeout food, this many plastic containers would have ended up being thrown away.
If you have difficulty doing this, or if this is your first time, I recommend you start with food that needs only one container.
A manager in a recycling plant in Yongin City, southeast of Seoul, says the facility has been getting more waste since the outbreak began.
In 2019, we received an average of 57 tons of waste a day, but last year we processed 64 tons a day, which is 12% more than the year before.
As you can see behind me, there are so many plastic containers and cups thrown away here. Only plastic that is longer than 15 centimeters get recycled, so small pieces of waste such as plastic straws end up just getting incinerated. South Korea's Environment Ministry is planning to ban the use of paper cups, plastic straws, and disposable stirrers in coffee shops. And the country's largest food delivery app, Baemin, also includes a button that says, "I don't need plastic spoons and forks." Since the button was introduced in 2019, it has been tapped more than 120 million times, saving more than $13 million of disposable products. Baeunji, Arirang News.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Korea Development Institute, one of the country's top think tanks. For the past half-century, KDI has advised the government on policy and played a crucial role in overcoming historic economic crises, such as the Asian financial crisis of the 1990s, the global financial crisis of 2008, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. Kim Jae-hee has more.
The Korea Development Institute has played a pivotal role in South Korea's rapid economic and social development. Throughout the half a century since its establishment in 1971, the institute has come up with economic plans tailored to Korea's own situation and has provided guidance to the government in terms of policy. The think tank also helped build an economic and social order based on an understanding of Korean society and in-depth analysis by experts. This economic and social system became a blueprint for the government, especially in times of crisis.
South Korea faced the credit card crisis in 2003, the financial crisis of 2008, and in 2019 and 2020, there was the COVID-19 pandemic. When it comes to finding solutions to issues that could hugely impact the society or the economy, it's important to understand the society itself. We get better solutions when we combine the in-depth knowledge of experts with this understanding of society.
The social system built over the decades also laid the foundation for Korea to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic as well.
From the late 1970s, policymakers felt the need to focus more on social development, not just economic growth. In 1977, healthcare services were introduced, followed by health insurance systems a year later. And in 2008, Korea launched its program for long-term care insurance. These advanced medical systems, established long before the COVID-19 outbreak, have laid the foundation for free COVID-19 testing and treatment.
Now the institute acts as a channel between Korea and developing countries, sharing Korea's experience in successfully transforming from a recipient of international assistance to a donor country.
I found it very apt to be able to learn from the best practices of Korea, especially with regard to free trade agreements, sustainable development, and also international cooperation.
While in the past, South Korea has been a second mover, searching for answers by looking to the advanced countries, KDI is now working to map out Korea's future direction as a pioneer in its own right, preparing for the post-pandemic era. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good to have you back on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, the global financial markets are taking a hit from the concerns about inflation in the U.S. A lot of opinions out there, but many say we need to prepare for interest rates to rise. What do you make of the situation, and how do you think it'll affect people's investments in stocks and real estate?
U.S. inflation is actually increasing slowly from the end of last year. The most recent U.S. inflation rate of January became 1.4% on annual basis. It is 0.3% higher than a quarter ago. U.S. inflation is still actually far below from the Fed's target inflation rate of 2%. But as economic recovery is evident and U.S. government's fiscal stimulus goes on, we have stronger inflation pressure. Due to this higher inflation expected, market interest rate or bond yield increases quickly in both of United States and Korea. Since recent boom of the asset market, particularly in stock market, has been led by ample liquidity, there will be some adjustment in asset markets due to higher inflation.
Well, in Korea, it seems right now that inflation is being driven by pressure from the supply side rather than demand. Groceries, for example. Tell us about that and what might be done to keep it in check.
In Korean economy, recent higher price level is partially generated by oil price increase, raw material price increase, and agricultural product price increases. Since we import most of these materials and agricultural products, unfortunately, Korean economy does not have much control on this production factor price-induced inflation. We have to wait and see whether these prices go up further. But if price increase continues, there is a possibility of stagflation, which is a combination of recession and inflation.
Well, turning to the stock markets, Wall Street overnight had another big dip, another surge in bond yields, dealing a blow to tech shares. Energy and financials, on the other hand, with a decent gain. What's the story in the global markets?
These days, the most influential factors to global stock market are higher inflation and interest rate increased interest rate. Yesterday, U.S. 10-year Treasury bond yield increased by 0.1% in a single day, up to 1.5%. This higher inflation gave a negative impact, particularly on high-tech stock enlisted NASDAQ. But pro-cyclical stocks like energy and finance stocks increased due to expected economic recovery. Dow Jones Industrial decreased by 0.4% yesterday, and NASDAQ decreased in a larger scale by 2.7%.
And a similar story in the Korean markets. All three main indices down. The Kospi around 1.5%. Tell us about the local market.
As U.S. interest rate goes up yesterday, domestic market declined seriously today. As U.S. interest rate goes ups and downs from last week, domestic market became much more volatile than before. Over the last 2 weeks, we saw a 3% daily increase and 3% daily decrease. Kospi had a negative 1.3%, and Kosdaq also lost 0.5% today. Particularly, even though individual investors purchased over $2 trillion won stocks today. Kospi dropped due to foreign and institutional investors' aggressive sales.
And we do see Korea's exports recovering. Last month, the daily value of those shipments rose to a 9-year high, and exports increasing in most of the main categories. Tell us a bit more about this recovery and if you think it'll go on.
Korea's exports expanded by 9.5% last month, posting the best performance for the month of February in 9 years. It is an impressive achievement under difficult situation over pandemic. Export began to pick up from November of last year, and after that, Korean export is increasing almost 2 digits every month. Export increase is, of course, related to global economic recovery. Particularly, major export items are leading overall export increase. In February, semiconductor export increased by 13%, and automobile export also increased by 47% on annual basis. As COVID vaccine is more distributed, Korean export will continue to increase by the end of this year.
And finally, Professor, before we go, I want to ask you about the preliminary data from the Bank of Korea showing that last year Korea's per capita gross national income declined. It came to around $31,700 per person. But interestingly, even before the pandemic, it declined both of the previous years too. So what explains this decline in per capita GNI?
Well, of course, the decrease of the personal income of last year is related to pandemic of coronavirus. But I think as Korean economy is rebounding due to the distribution of COVID vaccine and export increases, I think we will recover the previous level of GNI by the end of this year.
All right, Professor, we hope so. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today, as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. The Blue House says President Moon Jae-in is willing to get the COVID-19 vaccine made by AstraZeneca in the near future when the time comes. The top office said Thursday that the timing of the president's vaccination will be determined according to the procedures of the KDCA and in consideration of his diplomatic schedule. Moon's been invited to attend the in-person G7 meeting scheduled for mid-June in the UK. His first shot is expected in late March or early April, given that the AstraZeneca jab requires 2 doses within a time frame of 8 to 12 weeks, and considering the time it takes to build immunity. In South Korea, the AstraZeneca vaccine is currently being given to people below the age of 65. President Moon is 68. The announcement of his willingness to get it is likely meant to ease concerns about its safety and effectiveness. Health officials in South Korea are investigating the deaths this week of 2 people who just days before had gotten their first AstraZeneca shot. No direct links have been found yet, but officials are urging the public to trust the vaccination program. They're also stressing that social distancing is just as important as getting vaccinated. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
With COVID-19 vaccinations well underway, South Korea is focused on a 2-track strategy: speeding up its vaccination drive and slashing infection rates. The first task became more challenging Wednesday when 2 patients at nursing hospitals who got the AstraZeneca vaccine died. Both had underlying health conditions, but it is not yet clear if their deaths were directly linked to the vaccine. As authorities carry out the probe, the government held an emergency briefing asking people to stay calm.
Other countries have reported cases of people dying after the vaccine due to pre-existing conditions and other reasons. But none of them had to do with the AstraZeneca or Pfizer vaccines that South Korea is currently using. So we urge people against feeling overly worried or avoiding the shots.
As far as the AstraZeneca vaccine is concerned, the KDCA said the UK has reported just over 400 deaths after those people got the AZ shots. 113 such deaths were reported in Germany, but none of them have shown to have any direct correlation with the vaccine itself. In the meantime, South Korea's prime minister is urging the public to stay alert, as vaccination itself is not enough to effectively control infections. He cited the WHO's latest report, which shows that some countries are seeing another wave of cases since their vaccinations, like Israel and the US, which experts there attribute to relaxed social distancing.
The WHO says it would be a mistake to rely solely on vaccinations. To successfully overcome COVID-19, vaccination should go hand in hand with strict social distancing.
He said it is critical South Korea does not make the same mistakes, especially with experts warning of a possible fourth wave later this month. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
South Korea's Prosecutor General Yoon Seok-youl offered to resign today, and President Moon Jae-in has accepted his offer. Yoon's resigning over the ruling Democratic Party's campaign to strip the prosecution of its investigative powers and give them to a new state agency. Announcing his resignation in front of the Supreme Prosecutor's Office, Yoon said that the constitutional values of South Korea and rule of law are being destroyed. Under the ruling party's plan, the prosecution's powers to investigate 6 types of crimes, including corruption, will be given to the Serious Crime Investigative Agency, leaving prosecutors only with the power to make indictments. President Moon aims to reform powerful institutions such as the State Prosecution Service, which has often been accused of abusing its power. Yoon was appointed to the post by the president in July 2019 and leaves with 4 months left in his term. This morning, Seoul's chief negotiator for the defense cost-sharing talks left for Washington to try to reach a new agreement on how much South Korea has to contribute to the cost of stationing American troops on the peninsula. Both Seoul and Washington have hinted that a deal, now over a year in the making, is imminent. Yoon Jung-min reports.
Seoul and Washington expect to reach an agreement sooner rather than later on their defense cost-sharing negotiations. Heading to Washington, D.C. on Thursday for the 9th round of talks on the Special Measures Agreement, Seoul's chief negotiator Chung Eun-bo hinted that the two sides have made substantial progress.
I will be talking face-to-face in the U.S. to resolve some remaining issues. As for the negotiations, the two sides have made a substantial agreement in general, so I expect to reach a deal as early as possible.
The negotiator withheld further details on the ongoing talks with his American counterpart, including exactly how much the deal will come to and when it will take effect. A U.S. State Department official also told Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency that Seoul and Washington are very close to reaching an agreement on an updated SMA, calling the bilateral alliance the linchpin of peace, security, and prosperity in the region and the world. It is widely expected that the Biden administration will accept a 13% increase from South Korea's last payment, as well as a multi-year agreement that increases Seoul's contribution. In 2019, South Korea paid over $900 million. Talks on the deal have been stalled for about a year after the previous Trump administration demanded a sharp increase. But Biden has made it clear that his administration wants to restore alliances, including striking a deal with Seoul as early as possible. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul held an online conference on Wednesday with health officials in Israel, a country that's been a leader in getting its citizens vaccinated. In a matter of weeks, Israel's given at least 1 dose to half of its population, and around a third of Israelis have gotten 2. Officials in Seoul wanted to learn more about the country's vaccination process. The Israeli side said vaccinations have decreased symptomatic cases by 94% and cases of severe disease by 92%. Israel's daily cases are now down to 1/3 of the number reported in mid-January. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.